My name is Evelyn Reed, and I was 20 years old living in the quiet, green town of Willow Creek, Oregon. I was a student at our local junior college, working hard to figure out what I wanted to do with my life and honestly, mostly just trying to get through each semester. Willow Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and life moved at a comfortable, slow pace, surrounded by tall pine trees and the smell of damp earth. My world was pretty small but full, centered around my girlfriend Maya and our little apartment. Maya and I had decided to move in together that semester, mostly to save money on rent, which was a big deal for both of us trying to make ends meet while studying. We were inseparable, always laughing, always talking about our dreams, and just enjoying the simple, cozy life we were building. I felt incredibly lucky to have her. I also worked part-time in the administration building at the college. It wasn't the most exciting job, mostly filing, answering phones, and helping students with basic questions, but it paid the bills and gave me a sense of responsibility. I was usually the quiet type, observing more than speaking, but fiercely loyal to the people I cared about. If you were in my circle, you were protected. One evening, Maya mentioned she'd invited a friend from one of her English classes over for a game night. I loved game nights. We'd gather with a few other friends, order a pizza, and spend hours battling it out over board games or card games. It sounded like a perfect plan. When Maya's friend arrived, I was surprised to see it was Chloe, someone I recognized from high school. We hadn't been super close back then, but we'd had a few classes together and always got along. It was a pleasant surprise to reconnect. That night was genuinely fun. Everyone clicked, the laughter was loud, and Chloe fit right in with our group. After that, Chloe became a regular fixture. She'd come over for dinner, join our game nights, or just hang out to watch movies with Maya and me. It was nice having her around, a new energy in our little home. She even brought her boyfriend, Derek, over a couple of times. He was a different story, though. Derek was quiet, almost standoffish. He rarely engaged in conversation, always seemed to be looking anywhere but at us, and gave off the distinct impression that he did not want to be there. No one in our group really felt comfortable around him, but we tolerated him for Chloe's sake. Fortunately, he usually found an excuse not to come, so his appearances were rare. A month or two passed, and everything seemed normal until one Tuesday evening when Chloe called Maya. Her voice was shaky, full of tears, and it immediately set off alarm bells in my head. Maya, after a quick whispered conversation, looked at me with wide, worried eyes and said Chloe needed to come over right away. Of course, we told her to come. When Chloe arrived, she was a mess, her face red and streaked with tears, her shoulders hunched. Maya wrapped her in a hug while I just sat there, my stomach tightening with a knot of dread. What had happened? Chloe eventually calmed down enough to tell us. Derek had apparently gotten incredibly angry about her spending so much time at our apartment. He started yelling, accusing her of cheating on him. She didn't specify who he thought she was cheating with, whether it was me, Maya, or someone else, but the very idea was laughable. It was absolutely ridiculous and completely untrue. As she tried to walk past him to leave, he had shoved her hard. She lost her balance, tripped over a coffee table, and fell to the floor. Later, Maya told me Chloe had shown her a massive bruise blooming across her lower back and buttock. I didn't see it myself, but the image of it, combined with Chloe's tearful face, burned into my mind. Chloe swore Derek had never physically hurt her before, and she tried to brush it off as an accident, a moment of uncontrolled anger. But I was beyond angry. I was furious. My blood was boiling. You do not, under any circumstances, mess with my friends. And you absolutely do not assault a woman. My first raw impulse was to go find Derek and beat him senseless. I'm a tall woman, strong for my age, but I've never been in a real fight in my life. I'm not a violent person, and the thought of physical confrontation made my stomach churn even as my mind screamed for vengeance. I felt helpless watching Chloe cry, seeing the fear in her eyes, knowing that this awful man had hurt her and was still out there. This injustice burned deep. How could he just get away with it? The problem was clear. Derek had hurt my friend, and I needed to make him pay, but I couldn't do it with my fists. I was unsatisfied with the idea of him walking away from this scot-free, and this feeling of powerlessness festered inside me. I spent the next few days in a daze of simmering rage. Chloe, bless her heart, had immediately broken up with Derek the night after he pushed her, but she was still terrified. She was worried about running into him on campus, especially since they shared an English class on Tuesdays. Seeing her so withdrawn, her usual bright spark dimmed by fear, made my chest ache. Every time I saw her flinch at a sudden noise or look over her shoulder, my frustration grew. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, Derek shoving her, Chloe falling. The image of that bruise, unseen but vividly imagined, fueled my anger. I wanted to protect her, to make him understand the pain he had caused, but what could I do? I wasn't a brawler. I wasn't going to physically attack him and risk getting in trouble myself, or worse, making things worse for Chloe. The problem felt immense, a heavy weight pressing down on me. I felt like I was failing my friend by not being able to fix this, to make her feel safe again. My usual quiet nature made me feel even more ineffective in this kind of situation. I tried to comfort Chloe, to reassure her, but words felt hollow. I needed action. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that conventional methods were not going to work. Calling the police might lead to an investigation, but Chloe was hesitant to press charges, afraid of the hassle and the potential retaliation. And what if he just got a slap on the wrist? It wouldn't be enough. He deserved more than a warning. He deserved to suffer consequences that truly matched the pain and fear he inflicted. I watched Chloe leave our apartment after a particularly tearful afternoon, her shoulders slumped, and a wave of despair washed over me. All hope felt lost for her to truly move on without some kind of justice. She was still scared, and Derek was still out there, free to do as he pleased. This low point, seeing my friend so vulnerable and me so seemingly powerless, pushed me to think differently. I closed my eyes, picturing Derek's arrogant face, and then a flicker of an idea, a tiny ember of a plan began to glow in my mind. It was a risky thought, unconventional, but it used the tools I had. My job in the administration building, my access. The gears in my mind started to turn, slowly at first, then picking up speed. The deadline was fast approaching, the last possible day to drop or add classes without penalty or requiring special permission. This was my window. I knew my way around the college's old, clunky student information system better than most. The internet was still a fairly new concept back then. Not everything was online, especially not something as critical as student records. Enrollment changes often had to be done in person or over dedicated phones located right there in the administration building where I worked. My heart pounded as I mentally rehearsed my plan. I waited until my lunch break, when the office was usually quieter, most of the other student workers were out, and the main staff was often engrossed in their own tasks. I found a quiet terminal tucked away in a corner, out of direct line of sight from the main desk. My hands were a little shaky as I typed in Derek's name. His student identification number, his current classes, his fees, it all popped up on the screen. He was a foreign student, a detail I remembered from one of Chloe's casual conversations. That was a critical piece of information I knew, because foreign students had strict requirements about maintaining a certain number of units to stay enrolled and, by extension, to stay in the country. This wasn't just about making him miserable, this could genuinely mess up his life. The thought made me feel a cold, hard sense of resolve, pushing away any lingering doubts. This wasn't about violence, it was about precision. I took a deep breath. Using one of the dedicated enrollment phones, the kind that bypassed the general switchboard and connected directly to the system, I began. With each carefully entered number, each confirmation tone, I felt a surge of adrenaline. First, I dropped all of his current classes, every single one. English, math, history, whatever he was taking, gone. The system processed it, confirming each drop with a robotic voice. Then I meticulously went through the course catalog, searching for every single class that had a hefty course fee attached. Lab fees, art studio fees, special equipment fees, anything that would pile up debt on his student account. If you owed money to the school, even a small amount, you couldn't get copies of your transcripts, register for new classes, or access any essential student services. It would essentially freeze him out of the system. I enrolled him in half a dozen of these high-fee classes, not caring about the schedule conflicts, knowing that it wouldn't matter. His entire academic life, his visa status, everything was now in jeopardy because of a few keystrokes and button pushes. It was a calculated, quiet attack, one that would leave no physical trace back to me. The satisfaction was immediate, a cold, hard knot of triumph in my stomach. I carefully logged out, made sure there was no history on the terminal, and went back to my duties, my face a mask of casual indifference. No one suspected a thing. I didn't dare look up Derek's records again right away. I needed to keep my distance, to let the dust settle, to ensure no one could ever trace this back to me. I wanted to hear about the fallout, but I knew I couldn't ask. The waiting was agony, but it was also part of the plan. Then, a few days later, Chloe called Maya, her voice buzzing with a strange mix of confusion and relief. They still had their shared English class on Tuesdays, and Chloe had been dreading it, stomach churning at the thought of seeing Derek. But when she got there, something was different. The classroom was packed, with an extra person standing in the back because there weren't enough seats. The teacher, noticing the crowded room, decided to take roll, something she rarely did. As the names were called and the teacher reached Derek's name, he wasn't on the list. Chloe watched in stunned silence as Derek, who had been sitting in his usual seat, stood up and tried to argue with the teacher. He insisted he was enrolled, that there must be a mistake. But the teacher, holding the official class roster, simply shook her head. He wasn't on it. Apparently, someone on the wait list had taken his place after I had dropped all his classes. There was nothing Derek could do. He tried to argue some more, his face getting redder and redder, but the teacher was firm. He eventually packed up his bag, threw a furious glance around the room, and stormed out. Chloe told Maya she never saw him in that class again. Hearing that news, a shiver ran down my spine. It was working. My heart swelled with a quiet, fierce satisfaction. This was justice in my own way. Life moved on after that. Maya and I eventually drifted apart, as sometimes happens with young love, and we went our separate ways. Because of that, I lost touch with Chloe too, which was a shame. I often wondered what had become of Derek. Months later, curiosity finally got the better of me. It was after I had left my job at the administration building, so I couldn't access the student records directly anymore, but I still knew people. I made a casual inquiry to a former coworker, pretending I was looking for an old friend, and managed to get a peek at Derek's student account. All the classes with course fees that I had enrolled him in were gone, presumably dropped or paid for, but he had no other classes on the books either. Nothing. His record was effectively blank. It wasn't a confirmation, but it strongly suggested he had been kicked out of school or had been forced to leave the country. I didn't try to confirm it further. I didn't want to dig too deep, to risk anything coming back to me. The thought lingered sometimes, a small seed of worry, wondering if I had been too harsh, if my actions were truly justified. But then I would remember Chloe's tear-stained face, the fear in her eyes, the unseen bruise on her back, and any shred of guilt would vanish. He deserved it. He deserved every bit of the inconvenience, the disruption, and the potential ruin of his academic future. He had tried to control and hurt someone I cared about deeply, and I had in turn taken control of his future. It was a cold, calculated revenge, and it was effective. Mess with me, fine, but never ever mess with my friends. It was a lesson I learned then, a silent promise I made to myself, and a moment that subtly changed me from a quiet observer to someone willing to act cleverly and decisively when the people I loved were threatened.